Everyone, my name is Jakob Svensson. I'm very sad I cannot be with you. I broke my leg in Vienna, so I'm still in Vienna. But I'm very happy to share my reflections here with you in this way. So this research project is called ICTS and Opportunities for Empowerment in the context of state-sanctioned homophobia, the case of LGBTI community in Kampala. And this research I have conducted together with Cecilia Strand in Uppsala University, Sweden. And this we are particularly concerned here with Uganda, a country in Africa. You see it here, and in the capital region, which is Kampala, very close to Lake Victoria. The rationale for this study is the very dire environments for the LGBTQI community in Uganda. It's very famous for its anti-homosexuality bill in 2009, introducing one of the harshest bills actually. Death penalty for homosexuality, as well as jail time for promoting homosexuality, etc. Now, back and forth, it was challenged, and then it was passed, and then it was taken down by the Constitutional Court. But now again, they're trying to reintroduce it, so it's by no means over. And this has also led to homosexuals being attacked in Uganda, and also public support for this bill is quite high, about 90% according to Pew Research Institute when they started to measure it, or at 90% are against homosexuality. Cecilia and I are media and communication scholars, and media is of course very important for us. And here we can look at the tabloid media. And there are different, on the scale, there are those that are worse and those that are not that bad. But one of the worst here is, of course, Red Pepper, who annually publish names of the most prominent or Ugandan homosexuals. And one of my participants was actually in there, which led to people coming to his work, because this was the address they put in the paper, and basically beat him up. So he was beaten because of that. And we have the mainstream media is a little bit better, but they are by no means represented there. And then we have the case of David Kato, who was murdered in 2011. Okay, the Ugandan police claim he was murdered by his boyfriend, but we can assume that this is not the case, this was actually a hate crime. Now, this kind of state-sanctioned homophobia, is this part of a larger trend? This is not only Uganda, we see it in other places in Africa, Indonesia, India, and perhaps Russia. And perhaps now we even have to talk about the US. One prominent example here is the African nation's attempt to remove it. It's Muntaborn, the UN Human Rights Council independent expert on the protection against violence and discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. When they tried to vote him down in 2016, is pretty much a case in point. I think almost all African countries, apart from Rwanda, Liberia, South Africa, I'm not quite sure, but anyway. And this is often then framed in discourses of this being un-African, and that this is an attack on Africans' government's right to self-determination. So this is of course the larger context. The theoretical context is in ICTs and empowerment. Could ICTs be used here as a tool for this empowering this marginalized group? And we know the story. IT can be used for many different purposes, such as democracy, government, and participation, as is the name of this conference. However, we need to be a bit wary of large claims here. The field of or the area of ICTs for development has been largely criticized for being techno-deterministic. And I've been part of that criticism, published together with Caroline, and I think I presented it here at the conference a couple of years ago. So we therefore choose to use the term empowerment as our theoretical concept here, and it's defined as those without power taking control over their life situation, destiny, and environment. Now, important not to return to some kind of techno-determinism. We are structuring this around a delineation of empowerment as an analytical concept, which I just has published a chapter in, which is online on Springer, at the empowerment at the Springer Handbook of Communication for Development and Social Change. So you can look at this. Here, basically, we argue that we need to look at empowerment in many different levels: macro levels of intersecting structures of power, more contextual level of opportunity structures and constraints, which is then more micro, and then of course we look at the agency, the capabilities, as well as the affordances of the technology itself. And very importantly is also that we approach social media as a part of a larger communication ecology, that we need to look at how this is intersected with other types of communication platform. And Emiliano Trere and Alice Metoni has written an overview article, is very helpful. And in the Ugandan context, the important oral tradition, as well as the mass media environment, which I just accounted for in the previous slide, is very important in how ICTs then are used by the community. At least this is what we hypothesize. So the research questions for this project is to study how the community uses ICTs in combination with other media and communication platforms to coordinate, sensitize, mobilize their advocacy for human or LGBTQIA rights. How do they understand ICT's affordances here, and what communication practices are born out of this? And the aims is, of course, to nuance, sophisticate, and expand the analysis beyond techno-determinism, as well as a nothing changes dichotomy. We do believe that we should not be techno-deterministic, but at the same time we should be able to talk about what changes with technology as well, I think. We also want to help the community, of course. I'm gay myself, and Cecilia has worked with this community, so we are very positive towards that cause. And then, of course, this is also in line with Swedish aid policies, as well as its so-called feminist foreign policy. This can be debated, I know, how feminist this really is, but when we now search for money, we try to make this argument, at least. The study, it's just a work in progress here. I just conducted a pilot study, a couple of interviews, and 1 week of observations, online and off. Online observation has been continuing, and it's these groups that are on there. I don't need to go through them, but these are the most prominent groups. There are perhaps some more now, but that are most visible online, etc. Previous work should not talk too much about this because I'm running out of time. We could basically say that there needs to be work on this area. Cecilia has done work, but apart from that, not a lot of things has been done, especially not studies that places the community at the center of the analysis, and their agency and their actions and how they perceive things. So the preliminary results then are that the network is very important here, that I could perhaps not, when I started to do my interviews, was not even introduced, or people did not answer me in the beginning, but when I started to build up my friend list, and I could then be considered as being generally sympathetic to the concerns because I had mutual friends, etc. This is when I started to get contacts. We can also see how the offline and online really interconnects here, different modes of communication in the communication ecology, so to speak. That, for example, the Icebreaker Clinic, which is, in plain, have a website where you can actually ask for having an HIV test if you're having sex with someone with the same gender. But if you email them, you wouldn't get a response. Interestingly, so I emailed them, didn't get a response, but then I went to the weekly gay night at the bar in Kampala and was introduced to the director of Icebreaker, and the morning after I had an answer on the email. So this is very interesting. So I was kind of vetted offline before I could get online contact. And another point that's interesting here is that according to our participants, they made a distinction because what they called surface information or deep information, or front stage and backstage, if you want to use Goffman-esque terminology. So basically the surface information, the web pages, the Facebook pages, etc., was more non-sensitive, non-confrontational communication, because they knew that they were surveilled there, and which was also they never advertised any events. But after the event, you could see the pictures and you'd be like, oh, I wanted to go to this event, I had no idea it was taking place. No, this is not the channels where they communicate information about events prior to the events has happened. This is where they use other channels, which for more interpersonal, deep contact. Oral information is very important, but among the ICTs we could see the use of the dating apps, interestingly enough, because Grindr was not surveilled by the state. So this was used for dissemination of information, as well as different WhatsApp group. WhatsApp was of huge importance here. So to conclude then, preliminary conclusion, we can say that we can see how they use ICTs in combination with other communication modes to coordinate their lives and advocate for human rights. Difference between different modes of communication, between deep information and surface information, as well as a very intricate understanding of the surveillance of different platforms, etc. So there are communication practices born out of this. Now, this is very much work in progress. This is the time where I would love to have your comments, because this is where the comments from you matters the most, and I cannot be there. But if you have some comments, criticisms, I would really like to hear them. So please, if you find the time to send me an email, do that. And thank you very much for listening.